Hello, and welcome to What is Innovation, the podcast that explores the reality of a word that is in danger of losing its meaning altogether. This podcast is produced by Outlast Consulting, LLC, a boutique consultancy that helps companies use innovation principles to solve their toughest business problems. I'm your host, Jared Simmons, and I'm so excited to have David Cutler. Speaker, author, consultant, and facilitator, David Cutler is known for leading immersive innovation games. These powerful, team-based experiences have empowered business, arts, and education communities from around the globe to solve creative challenges while becoming better collaborators. In addition to being founder and CEO of the Puzzler Company, he is also an award-winning multi-genre musician and Yamaha master educator. Cutler is a distinguished professor at the University of South Carolina, where he teaches innovation and entrepreneurship, and a member of the Liberty Fellowship and Aspen Global Leadership Network. David, thank you so much for joining me on the show today. I'm so excited for the conversation.
Jared, it's so nice to chat with you. I'm looking forward to it as well.
Oh, great. Well, let's get to it then. Why don't we just dive right in? Tell me, what is innovation?
To me, innovation is extraordinary problem solving. It's taken the same data and status quo and the way things are, the hand you were dealt, and discovering an extraordinary solution out of it. You know, I also think innovation is a process. We often think about the end result. Oh, well, that was very innovative that they did that. But for me, I spend most of my time around innovation focusing on the process. I actually call it a game, on gamifying the process of innovation. And if your game is strong enough, you don't know what will happen at the other end, but you're almost guaranteed an innovative result.
Oh, interesting. It's extraordinary problem solving. I love that. And the focus on the process and the gamification, I would imagine, serves a number of purposes, but the focus on the process, I really find I can get a lot out of that because it's easy to, like you said, focus on the end result without thinking about how you got there. And if you only focus on the end result, it feels like you could end up kind of throwing out the baby with the bathwater, for, lack of a better term, but you end up, walking away from a process that works because it doesn't work 100% of the time.
Yeah, I hear a lot of people say, well, what kind of innovative solution should we have here? I'm like, whoa, how are you going to get there? They're so focused on the what, and they want to kind of skip the journey.
Yeah.
But the journey's not only the spectacular part of it, but it is the necessary part. We don't have teleportation in the real world, and we don't when it comes to innovative design either.
Right.
Got to take the walk,
Yeah, you do. You definitely do. When you talk about extraordinary problem solving, how do you take that and turn that into a process or a game? How does that work?
Well, first of all, I consider any well-designed process to be a game, whether or not it's particularly gamey. You don't need dice or concept cards in order to effectively solve problems. And yet, there are a lot of benefits of outright, unapologetic gamification. When you play a game, people are accountable to rules and results. They are often willing to be creative and strategic in ways they never would be outside of the game, because there's a lot of caution there. But this is what the game requires. Well, the problems we tackle might be absolutely serious, but people are more likely to discover the remarkable when they're engaged in the process and having a good time, or at least having a meaningful journey. So it can be fun, it can be powerful to play that, and that leads to better solutions.
I can imagine it would. So I heard sort of accountability in what you were saying. I heard a bit about creating almost like psychological safety to be more creative. I could see a game doing that. How did you kind of evolve into this? How did this point of view come about? I imagine you don't just sort of roll out of bed one morning and say, I'm going to gamify innovation.
That's absolutely true. These processes take a long time.
Yeah.
Every once in a while you get a eureka moment,
right?
But usually innovation takes a long time.
Yeah.
I've been running these processes for a long time. Sometimes it would be a couple hours, sometimes it would be a couple days, sometimes it would be a week. But where there's a beginning, middle, and end, and a problem to solve, and usually there are teams and they're working, maybe there's a competition at the end. And for many years, we didn't know what it was exactly that we that we were doing. Is it
right?
At one point we were calling it a retreat, but this is not a spa. This is, someone said they went to something. They said I just went to an event. It was more like a spa. Yours is more like boot camp. I'm like, okay, well maybe what we're doing is boot camp. And we tried all these different things and nothing felt right. And one day, one of my business partners came up with this. He's like, what if I don't even know if he came up with it or I came up with it. That's how it works. Ideas belong to the team.
Yeah.
It's kind of like we're playing a game. And that made it clear. Then as things evolved, game is actually an acronym that describes a very loosely designed framework. It stands for G, guidelines, A, arena, M, materials, and E, experience. So it's very flexible, very quickly. So guidelines is, the first step of the game is defining what is this game about?
Yeah.
What's the most important problem you're trying to solve? What are the constraints? And what are the criteria? What constitutes success? Before you know the solution, just what are we even trying to do here? That's the G.
Right.
And then A is arena. That's about what do you have to work with? It's about puzzlers, who's solving this problem, place, where will this problem be solved, and period, how long do you have to solve this problem? That's the A. M is about materials, the kind of physical or digital tools that you will use. Like I see that whiteboard behind you. That's an example of a material, but there are all kinds of materials we use in innovation, game design. And then the E is the experience. What exactly happened? What happens first and second and third and last and everything in between? Again, we're not figuring out the results. We don't know what the solution is going to be.
Exactly.
Do think about the questions that will be asked along the way.
Oh, fascinating. What's exciting about that is I love frameworks and principles and all those things. What I really love are simple, elegant frameworks that almost feel self-evident. And that one is one of those where it almost feels self-evident, which shows you how much work and culling and reframing and revising and how much discipline I'm sure it took to get something this elegant and applicable to the various different types of problems. My brain is just going in 1,000 different directions as I'm thinking through this. As I'm looking at this acronym and the process, it's flashing me back almost to grade school on the playground when someone says, let's play tag or let's play whatever. The questions you ask are the questions 6-year-olds ask another 6-year-old when they say, oh, we're going to play this game. Well, how do you play? How do you win? Where's out of bounds?
Right.
All those same things. So I really love how universal and relatable that framework is.
Well, I love that you're going back to elementary school because they really do know something about it. I actually wrote an article called 6 Things Kindergarten Teachers Know That Most CEOs Do Not. And it focused on some of the value systems and frameworks that you would find in almost any kindergarten structure and almost no Fortune 100 company that might be really helpful, including those companies that are always saying innovation, 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 that might really help them to get there.
Right. Right. So these are self-contained experiences, primarily the things that you create for organizations. Are they typically freestanding things or are they ongoing processes?
So I've worked with all kinds of organizations for a number of types of games.
Okay.
But usually, often what will happen is they'll come in for a given period of time. That's the arena, right?
Right.
How much time do you have to work with? They say, well, we got 3 hours or we got an afternoon or we got, Monday through Thursday, whatever it is. And then trying to build an experience that works within that. And sometimes it's not a single game. Sometimes it's just training.
Right.
So a number of training kind of workshops. We call them huddles, but training. And then sometimes you're playing a game with a beginning, middle, and an end. And when there's enough time, often I like to do some timeouts. Okay, now we're not playing the game. Now we're just reflecting on that, or we're learning a strategy that you can just apply to the game, or maybe a game within the game or an activity within the game, something like that.
Yeah.
So it takes a lot of work to do that, but to custom design that experience, depending on who the people are and what kind of challenges they have and, where we're going to be working. In some ways, we're kind of problem agnostic. In a way, the problem is everything. And in a way, the problem is almost irrelevant.
Right.
So it doesn't matter if you're in healthcare or you're in, financial advising or you're in education or the arts, wherever you are. people are people, strategy is strategy. So a lot of times the client, they're the experts in the content.
Right.
And our job is to figure out the process and often to facilitate that process. I just have to understand enough about really what is it.
Right.
And sometimes going in, as an outsider, I ask these naive but kind of obvious questions because I don't have the curse of knowledge in their field.
Exactly.
So what does that acronym mean? What is that approach? And sometimes it's very difficult, but also valuable, I think, for people to spell things out and to think, because if they can explain it to me, they can probably explain it to their colleagues and the likes and have clarity around that. So that's a process in itself.
Yes. The problem, to your point, almost becomes an aspect of the arena, not to kind of start to plug stuff into your framework. But as you're describing it, being problem agnostic, the problem itself becomes part of the sort of parameters of the game, and being able to help people with that naive point of view, the curse of knowledge. I like that a lot, and help them sort of unpack that. That has to be invaluable to clients.
That's the very first step.
Yeah.
Is what problem are you going to solve?
Yeah.
And so, we want to do this and this and this and this and this. It's not going to happen.
Yeah.
It's not going to happen. To focus it so you know exactly this is the issue that we're working with. And even to define that problem in one sentence can take hours.
Oh.
It's so hard for people to do it. But once you do it, there's great clarity. Angel choir just sings when they hear that. Because, okay, now we know what it is that we're here to do within the context of this game or this part of this game.
Right. And the patience and humility required to stay in that moment. I've seen, in similar situations, this shouldn't be this hard kind of thing start to settle in with folks as you're trying to help them stay with it. It's just one little sentence. And we work on this stuff all day, every day. Why is it so hard to write this sentence?
And that's such a good point. And if you get that right, if you get the framework right, it makes the problem solving a lot easier.
Yes.
If you do the work on the front end. But if you don't, and you're like, well, let's just, throw it out. We're not going to think too carefully about the wording. Then probably you won't solve the problem.
That's right.
You won't get to innovation. Yeah.
And you won't know where the failure was.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. So extraordinary problem solving, that's what innovation is. Love that. Why don't you tell me, David, what isn't innovation?
What isn't innovation?
Yes.
Well, I was thinking about this question. I came up with a list of 6 things that innovation isn't.
6 things. I can't wait.
That's a lot of things that innovation isn't.
That
Would you like to
is.
hear some of it?
I'd love it.
Innovation is not technology.
Mm.
There's so much of the time I hear people talking about the innovation sector or innovation as if it's a synonym for technology. And the truth of the matter is that a lot of technology, of course, much innovation does happen in technology. Look at what happens to every iPhone iteration.
Oh my goodness, it's amazing, yeah.
But not all technology is innovative, and a lot of innovation is not technology.
Yes.
And so the notion that, the arts, that's not innovation, education, that's not innovation. These are things that fall out of it because they're not technology. No, that's not it.
Oh, man, you started off with one of my passion areas, so I can't wait for the other 5.
I love technology.
Yeah.
And that might be part of it, but that's not the whole. Okay, here's the second one. Ready?
Ready.
Drum roll. Okay. Innovation is not imitation.
Mm.
So I hear from a lot of organizations, we've been this way historically. Now we got to change. We got to innovate. We got to do something different. So let's look at what our competitors are doing and the steps they've taken, and then we'll do those things. And then we will be innovative because we'll be copying them like lemmings, running to the... And the thing is, innovation is, it's not in a vacuum, it's contextual. So the first time something is tried, it is remarkable. The third time, it's still pretty cool. By the 10th time, it's commonplace. By the 100th time, it's old-fashioned, right?
Yeah.
So innovation is not imitation. Number 3, you want another one?
I'd love it.
Innovation is not magic.
Oh man, this is going to be good.
There's this idea that innovators are born, not made.
Yes.
Right? It's as if the great heavens above opened up and decreed, thou shalt be a brilliant innovator. The rest of you pathetic schmucks,
don't even try.
To a life of average normalcy.
Right.
Whatever it is. It is not magic. The truth of the matter is, yes, some people are maybe more inclined with creative ideas or better feedback or better at research or whatever it is. Truth of the matter is that innovation is a skill like any other that can and must be cultivated. Innovators have chops. Innovation's not magic. Here's something else it's not. Innovation is not anarchy. Right? I hear this often from, well, we want to innovate. We want to think really big. So, and I'll ask, well, that's great. So what kind of constraints do you have around your problem? I'll be like, constraints? No. We want to let our imaginations run wild.
Yeah.
Like my kids after bedtime, Yeah. So the truth of the matter is that in order to innovate, you have to have rules. You have to have constraints.
You definitely do.
I mean, imagine if they were like, yeah, we need to find, a vaccine for COVID. So no rules.
Anything goes. What do you got?
Just draw with the crayons or whatever it is, right? There have to be strict structures and guidelines and timings and all those things into place. So if we were going to talk about you in this podcast, and you're like, my podcast, what is it? Innovation? I want to do something really innovative next time. What should I do? And I'm like, well, you could do anything. Well, the problem is the path to everywhere leads to surprisingly few destinations.
Yeah, that's great.
On the other hand, if I say, well, here's a constraint. You can do anything you want, Jared, anything you want, but there's one constraint. Somehow it has to involve a pineapple or, or bowling or something like that. I'm not telling you what to do, but it's got to involve that constraint in some way. All of a sudden, you probably, like you say, your mind has 1,000 ideas.
Yep.
Because there's a constraint, it helps you think in different ways that you probably never would have imagined. Bowling, please don't imagine bowling without that prompt or whatever it is, right?
Exactly.
Okay, here's fifth one. Ready?
Ready.
Innovation is not everything.
Oh my goodness, that is
a lot of organization. Well, we're an innovative organization, and innovation infiltrates everything that we do.
Everything we do. Oh, classic.
First of all, not everything needs innovation.
No.
Right? Your accounting probably doesn't need innovation or whatever it is. If you do, you're just creating you don't have to reinvent the wheel for every single thing you do.
Right.
And when it starts becoming a synonym for everything, like any other word, then it just means nothing.
Nothing. That is so true.
It either has to mean something at the expense of other things, or it becomes a meaningless buzzword.
Back to your constraints.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So innovation ain't everything.
Right.
And here's the last one. Innovation is not a big idea. Big ideas are really important. And we talk a lot in book that I had that just came out about big ideas and that being a part of kind of an innovation solution. But in a way, I mean, any creative person can have a big idea. You got to be able to bring it to life. That means you got to pay attention to the details and you got to get stuff done. So just picking up some big idea is not going to change the world. You got to do the grunt work. You got to bring it to fruition. Yeah.
I keep waiting for one of these ideas on my whiteboard to jump down and put itself in the market, but they don't.
Now that's a big idea. As soon as you think of it, it just does itself. You can figure that out. You'll be doing pretty well.
Oh man, what a list. Innovation is not technology. It's not imitation. It's not magic.
Nope.
It's not anarchy.
Nope.
It's not everything. And it's not a big idea.
Nope.
I love that list. There are so many lessons. I feel like in the world of innovation, there are lessons to be learned. The direct lessons of how to bring innovation to life, the indirect lessons from painful experiences. And what I love about this list is I can look at each one and think of a meeting I was in or a conversation I had.
There was an innovation.
Yeah, exactly. I have had this conversation or been on the receiving end of this conversation at various points in my career. And the innovation is not anarchy. That one speaks to me on a special level just because a lot of the roles I was in were sort of in what I call the middle part of innovation, where we've done the ideation and started the process of thinking up what to do next. And there's some people waiting on the other side to take whatever that is and go make $1 billion of it.
Yeah, right.
And in the middle is, our team.
Yeah, the doing part.
So how do you go from the Post-it to on the shelf? And that innovation is not anarchy. If I had been as pithy and clever as you, I could have saved myself a lot of breath in those years.
Well, a lot of times you're saying they give you the big idea and then just say, all right, make this happen. And there's nothing to work with. It's just 3 words.
Right. Yeah. Or, we're going to go off and do this for, a week. And no constraints, no this, no that. And so what comes out now, we have to figure out how to put constraints around it so that it could plug into something. And so bringing the constraints to big ideas that have been generated without constraints is not fun.
Yeah.
I'm sure this, is something you've dealt with, and probably how you came to such an elegant list.
I would say maybe that's trying to get to innovation without the game.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is.
Right?
That's why I love this framework, because it would have saved me a lot of trouble in my earlier years.
Innovation is not an industry it's not therapy. I don't know. Whatever. I'm not saying it right, but maybe when you don't get it right, and it just puts you in therapy, because it can be a damaging process.
Yes.
To be honest with you, even when you have a great process, innovation is not, I didn't put this on the list, but innovation is not easy. If it was easy, everyone would be doing it, right? It's hard work to make that happen.
Yeah.
But if you do, it can be some of the most fulfilling work you ever experience.
Yeah, that's why people keep coming back to it, right?
That's right.
It's hard, it's thankless. There's 1,000 tasks for every one thing you get to talk about and show. But when you get that one thing right, it's just amazing. So I love this list for a number of reasons. And thanks for sharing that. It's going up on the whiteboard. I'm going to pick out a spot.
Maybe it'll jump off and.
Yeah. Fingers crossed. So I alluded to a couple things that came up in my memory from your list. How has innovation sort of shaped your career?
Well, I've talked about leading innovation. Of course, that's an important part of my career.
Yeah.
I am an innovator to my core. And although I didn't always know that, but I've always kind of aspired to be the person, if 1,000 people looked at the same circumstance or the same problem, and 99 of them came up with the same or very similar conclusion, I always aspired to be the one to do things differently. And that, as I reflect back, has touched almost every aspect of my life. But I'll give you a recent example and maybe a further away example.
Sure.
So we recently released this book called The Game of Innovation. That's about some of the things we're talking about. It's about gamifying the process of innovation.
Great.
And the first thing I would say about it is, people have said before, well, David Cutler is someone who innovates the field of innovation. This was not just a better packaging of the methods that were out there. There's a lot of my own methodology. Not everything is original. I didn't invent brainstorming, but there are a lot of tools in there that really we have developed with my team.
Oh, fantastic.
But in addition to that, and just having original content, I wanted to make it just a different kind of a book. So I challenged even most of the conventions. I call it the 98% rule, that no matter what industry you're in, it seems like about 98% of people or organizations do essentially the same thing. So if you can stand out from that, you can immediately distinguish yourself.
Yeah.
So one of the things about books, I think it's fair to say that about 98% of books, maybe more, are portrait. In other words, they're higher than they are wide. And so that was one thing that we made it landscape, right? So flip the book the other way.
Nice.
And this was different than most business books, and certainly than my other books, which were word books. I decided to make this a visual book, right? So it would not just talk about innovation, but it would look like innovation.
Right.
So I worked with an illustrator and a graphic designer. So every page looks different. And if we did it well, the images, most people are visual learners.
Right.
So the images help enforce the words, and the words help enforce the images.
Exactly.
But if you take this book, and it's with McGraw-Hill, and it's beautiful. They did a great job with it. It's like a coffee table book. Wow. And if you hold it up with many of the other books that are my favorite books, my favorite business books in the same genre.
Yeah.
One stands apart because it doesn't look anything like any of the other ones. The other ones all look the same, and this is different. So that's an example of how it plays a role. Even when I'm writing about innovation, I wanted it to look like a game.
Yeah.
But I think historically, when you ask about how has it shaped my career, shaped me, my background, we were talking a little before the interview about how, we both share background in music.
Yes. Yes.
I don't have a business school background. It's in music. That's my training. I started playing piano at very early age. I honestly can't remember what happened first.
Wow.
Music lessons or my mom yelling at me. So, I started even at an early age, taking classical piano lessons, which taught me the value of attention to detail and the pursuit of excellence and developing an ironclad work ethic, those kinds of things.
Yeah.
But even back in the day, 3 years old, 4 years old, 5 years old, I'd be practicing my Mozart.
Wow.
And just, mixing it up a little bit, changing the notes, the rhythms to make it better, which I don't know if it did, but it was in the eyes of the beholder, right?
That's right. That's right. Made it better to you.
That's right, to me. So, and my mom would be in the next room and she'd be, David, that's not what it says. David, play what's on the page. David, eat your vegetables. David, all those things. But there was something inside of me that just had to find my own voice. And that ultimately led me towards jazz and composition, two places where creativity was not only tolerated, but expected. Jazz, it's just music, another kind of music, but it has such a different value system.
Oh my goodness. Yes.
In classical music, you get a piece, a standard composition, right? Standard repertoire, we call it.
Right.
And your job is to play it exactly the way it was intended, the way some creative genius, who is not you, by the way, some other creative genius who lived maybe hundreds of years ago, the way that they intended. Their notes, their rhythms, their dynamics, what is stylistically appropriate. In jazz, you also we use the same word, you get a standard a lot of the time. And your job is to perform it in a way that nobody else ever has before.
Right.
In that way. It teaches you about the values of taking a chance and walking the tightrope and, finding your own voice.
Yes.
Those aspects are both critical. A lot of people are big picture thinkers or detail oriented. Both are critical to innovation. I'm really grateful to that background, although it was tormenting to always be the guy in both worlds who was doing it wrong and not doing it like everyone else. But it taught me a lot of lessons.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's such a great unfolding and description of the differences between classical and jazz and the benefits of each, and also the unique sort of challenges in each world. And I think part of it is with music, you have to dive in. You have to do it wrong if you want to ever do it right. Nobody walks up to a piano. Well, I won't say no one, but I can't imagine someone walking up to a piano and playing anything perfectly the first time. You have license, like this implied license, to go through a process and to quote unquote fail through the process over and over and over again to succeed. But musicians don't look at it as failure. It's not, oh, I failed at playing, this chord change. It's, I'm playing this chord change for the next 15, 20 minutes until I get it right. But you don't play it perfectly every time you play it. But in the corporate world, people look at, okay, you tried this thing and it didn't work. You failed.
Yeah, right. That's interesting. I think about what you said. I mean, and we were talking before the interview, and you have classical background too, right?
Yeah.
Started out as a classical pianist.
Yeah.
What you're saying, I think, is definitely true in the jazz world where you're working on, you're saying, chord.
Right.
In the classical world, and it's just a different value system, the goal often, and I do work with a lot of musicians, including those from the classical world, and they bring so much to the table. I always tell business people, if you want to get something done and get it done right, hire a musician.
Yeah.
Because they pay attention to detail. I mean, who else scrutinizes every aspect of every note from the time that they're 2 years old?
Yeah.
But that tradition is about celebrating someone else's vision. And the goal isn't even to play well. The goal is perfection.
To replicate. Yeah.
Perfection each and every time. And anything less than that is a failure, like you're talking about in the business world.
Yeah.
And so not only are classical musicians not taught to innovate, they're taught to not innovate. That is not the job. Like I said, the creative genius is the person that is not you.
Right.
Whereas the composer is the genius. And because I'm a composer myself, I love the notion as a composer that we are omnipotent beings.
Right.
But as a performer, I find that resentful. Like, is there nothing unique to say? So now I confuse those two worlds. And oftentimes when I'm working on a classical piece, I almost have a rule that, and this could be a metaphor for anyone who listens to anything that happens in their world.
Yeah.
98%, I should say 99.99999, pretty much most players besides me and maybe one other guy.
Yeah.
The goal of classical music is to play it the way it was intended.
Yeah.
So I have a kind of a rule, at least for me. I always feel like, why should I do a job if someone else could do it? If someone else could do an equivalent job, you should hire them. I should spend my life pursuing the things that I am uniquely equipped to do.
Interesting.
So I play classical music. But a lot of times if I'm going to play a classical piece, and particularly something that's famous, that's been played hundreds of thousands of times before, I have a commitment coming in to not play it the way that it was intended to a degree, and not just subtle changes, tinkering around the edges, but to make so that even a lay audience person understands, well, he played that, but he also had bells on his angles and was using a kazoo. Like, that's probably not what Mozart had written on the page, yet it's a transformative experience.
Right.
Sometimes it's to amplify the intentions of the composer, and sometimes it's to challenge and disrupt those intentions, but to take that lesson from the one world and apply it to the other. On the flip side, sometimes I play jazz stuff, I'll just totally work out every little detail to make it very, very complex but very thought through. So blurring of cultures.
It's great to have both skill sets to be able to bring them into the different domains, which I think is a core element of innovation, is being able to cross domains with insights that create something new in that world.
It might be the most important, or one of the most important elements, is if you want to innovate, you got to go to someone else.
Yeah.
So much of the time we tend to surround ourselves with others who look and think a lot like we do, because it feels comfortable. We're all speaking the same language. We confirm one another's assumptions. And yet if you want to get a new idea, you got to go somewhere new. And innovation is usually taking an idea from one place and applying it elsewhere, which is exactly what you're saying.
Yeah. And I love that diversity is a term that gets thrown around in a lot of contexts.
Like innovation, right? Diversity.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. What is diversity?
Your next podcast.
Yeah, it is. In the context of innovation, diversity is such a deep and rich notion, because you're exactly right. If you want to do something innovative in music, get 5 musicians and a painter, or 5 musicians and an accountant, and see what comes out of it.
Yeah.
When you focus on the end product more than the process, that's where you can end up with this sort of disruption, intolerance to, anything that would disrupt the flow, because we've got to get to this end point, and this difference is slowing us down.
Totally. After the murder of George Floyd, I think a lot of American institutions took a hard look in the mirror and did not like what they found. Latent lack of inclusivity. And since then, thankfully, many organizations have taken at least baby steps to being more inclusive.
Right.
And yet, I think even if successful, that may not be enough, at least if innovation is the goal, because so often the goal of those initiatives becomes different looking, same thinking people, right?
Oh.
Well, that person, their complexion is different than mine, but they share all my basic worldviews about the problem that we're trying to solve.
They went to the same school I went to. Yes.
I love what you're saying about, the 5 music. We're talking way too much about accountants here, but like 2 or 3 times. But about 5 musicians and an accountant. Well, that's interesting, right? That's a blending of worlds. So it's not just about race and gender, although that's valuable. But diversity goes to discipline and beliefs and problem-solving styles. I mean, discipline and age.
Right.
All kinds of things like that. And type of job that you have and type of organization, all those kinds of things play into diversity.
And it's both, right?
Yeah.
The challenge with the way things are being addressed in the last couple of years is that racial, gender, and other types of diversity, that's the end game.
That's it. Yeah.
And you can have that and have more humanistic elements of diversity, like what you were describing. It brings me back to your original comment about when you focus on the end result versus process, it's really easy to end up with unintended consequences and more homogeneity than you intend to have when you take a single lens view of the problem.
Amen.
Thank you for that. Thanks for talking about that. I appreciate that.
Of course. Such an important issue.
It is. It really is. It pervades everything, and there's no wrong place or time to talk about it. Moving into that, do you have any advice for innovators?
Well, probably a lot.
Yeah, I thought you might.
One of the things I hear people talk about, individuals and organizations, is time management. And time management is important. And, when you're building a game, you have an overall length of the game, and this is much for each of those activities. So it's important in games, it's important in life, all those things. And I think a lot of people have thought a lot about time management. As I've gone deeper into life, both for myself and for clients and partners and communities, thought a lot more about project management.
Mm-hmm.
right? Like, what problem should we even tackle in the first place? And where should we devote our time? If you could do problem A, will help you 5 parsecs, and problem, whatever a parsec is, and problem B will help you 12, you should do B. I mean, depending on other considerations and the like.
Right.
And I find that so many organizations and individuals are focused on the less important problem. They'll focus on the nuance over the existential threat.
Right. Yes.
Or another part of project management is actually picking problems. I use the word problem for everything. So problem is not a negative term or positive term, like getting married. That's an amazing problem. But you still got to figure it out, right? So some problems are heartbreaking. Some problems are super exciting. And some problems are just logistical. But to be able to do that. And the other thing is about finding interlocking projects or problems so that with each game you go through, with each problem that you solve, you're building something bigger. You're making an empire that they go together. And what happens in so many organizations is they solve this problem and then they solve the next one and it almost competes against this one.
Right.
So it dilutes the effort of both instead of building it even bigger. And I see individuals doing this, for example, when they're trying to make a career model for artists and really in the gig culture. Talk about the gig culture in all kinds of industries where people have multiple income streams.
Yep.
There are a whole bunch of reasons why you might want to do that. And it's not for everyone, but for someone like me and maybe like you, I mean, it's just more fun to have variety and to have different networks, different people, different, kinds of things that you learn skills and you take ideas from one place and put it somewhere else.
Yep.
The biggest problem a lot of people with portfolio careers is time management. How do you get it all done? How do you keep all those balls in the air? But often what I see with people who do that is each of them is kind of an independent effort. And so they're not building anything over time. So 10 years later, they're doing the same gigs they were 10 years before.
Right.
They weren't strategic. They didn't build an empire. They didn't build a brand. They didn't build a monument.
Yeah.
They just did these random things that compete against one another. Does that make sense?
It does. It does. It's kind of like when you talk about the through line to a story.
Yeah.
You can have different plot elements that look disparate, but there has to be a through line that connects everything to ensure progress.
Yeah. So maybe it's the Uber story or the Uber game, not the car Uber, but the overall. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
What is it you're trying to build? Even if it has lots of different elements, how can you have them align rather than dilute? Exactly.
That is fantastic. David, thank you so much for your time. It's been a genuine pleasure and a wonderful conversation. Innovation is extraordinary problem solving. I love that. And thanks again for your time.
Thank you. This has been a ton of fun.
All right. Take care. We'd love to hear your thoughts about this week's show. You can drop us a line on Twitter at Outlast LLC, OUTLAST LLC, or follow us on LinkedIn where we're Outlast Consulting. Until next time, keep innovating, whatever that means.